So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first in a series of lunchtime learning webinars this Carers Week, delivered by Carers New South Wales. My name is Sarah Judd-Lamb. I'm the Executive Manager, Policy Development and Research at Carers New South Wales, and I'm pleased to be introducing this webinar. And you'll also be hearing from my colleague, Lucas Hofstadter, in a minute, as he's really the one that's most across our National Carer Survey findings from 2022. So if I can get the next slide, please, Lucas. Before we commence today's webinar, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands represented by the many of us that are online today, both presenting and joining. Here in North Sydney, where Lucas and I are located in our head office at Carers New South Wales, we recognise and acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we extend our respects to elders past and present from all the nations and lands represented today from across New South Wales and across the country. Just a brief introduction about Carers New South Wales for those that might be joining us and not aware. Carers New South Wales is the peak non-government organisation for family and friend carers in New South Wales, and we're part of a national carer network and a member of Carers Australia. And just listed there are our organisational goals. National Carers Week is the reason for this webinar and for us launching the 2022 National Carer Survey results today. So a little bit about National Carers Week 2022, if you're not aware. The theme for Carers Week this year is Millions of Reasons to Care. And Carers Week is a week that runs every year in October, and it's an opportunity to recognise and celebrate the millions of Australians that care for a family member or friend. In New South Wales, that's over 850,000. And so in terms of the definition of carer that we're running with today, that is those that care for a family member or friend that lives with a disability, mental illness, drug or alcohol dependency, a chronic condition, a terminal illness, or who is frail. And so just listed there are a few events. There's many events and activities happening nationwide and across New South Wales, run by lots of different organisations. But just to pop a few on the slide, these are some others that are coming up from Carers New South Wales. So today is one of 3 lunchtime learning webinars, and you can see that there's another one on Wednesday and another one on Friday, same time, same format. So if you haven't seen those or registered for those already, they may be of interest. We also have the return of our full day event at Redfern Community Centre tomorrow, which is the first time since the pandemic that we've been able to meet back in person. So please do register for that if you are able to get to Redfern tomorrow. There'll be lots of stalls and information and activities there. And then finally, we have a range of online health and wellbeing events for carers as well throughout this week. All of the above, you can find more information at the website listed, which is the Carers New South Wales website and upcoming events. So that's a little bit about National Carers Week. Coming back to this session today, so I mentioned that this is one of 3 lunchtime learnings events. This is a series of webinars that Carers New South Wales is delivering during National Carers Week for busy professionals, researchers, service providers, other professionals, working carers that want to learn a little bit about Carers New South Wales initiatives, but you know, don't have much time outside of perhaps their lunch break at work. We're also recording today's session, and we'll distribute that through our main channels so that others can catch up on it. And it's really just a bit of a highlight of some of the initial results that have been released as of this morning for the 2022 National Carer Survey. So after my brief introduction, we'll be handing over to Lucas Hofstadter, who will talk us through a bit of the background of the 2022 National Carer Survey, some high-level findings, and then we'll end this 30-minute session with a Q&A session. So if we can go to the next slide. Briefly on housekeeping. Once you're listening today, as you're listening to Lucas talk about the survey, you're more than welcome to submit a question in the Q&A function of this webinar. So you'll notice today that we are in a webinar format, not a meeting format in Zoom, which means that you're unable to see the other attendees. But you are able to submit questions through the question and answer icon at the bottom of the screen, as you can see there. You can post anonymously if you would like. And also feel free to comment in the chat. We do have someone in our team monitoring the chat. If you want to post comments, questions, or any issues with technology there, that is absolutely fine. So really today is just an overview of some high-level results, a bit of a taster. There'll be plenty more to come. and we hope you find it to be informative. So I think that is it for our introductory slides. Is that right?
Yes.
In which case, I'm handing over to Lucas to tell you a little bit more about the survey. Thanks, Lucas.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, starting off with a bit of a background. The Carer Survey is conducted every 2 years, and it's funded by the New South Wales Department for Communities and Justice in our function as the peak organisation representing family and friend carers. We do this survey to better understand what carers want and need, and it informs our direction, our advocacy that we do in the state for carers. And since 2020, we cooperate with the other state and territory care organizations to make this survey nationwide and to make the data available on a national level and for each state and territory, so that every care organization has current data available. It is designed, so the survey is designed with an academic advisory panel with academics from a variety of, from 4 universities, with care representatives, representatives from the Aboriginal community, and delegates from the other state and territory care organizations, so that we indeed have a national survey that is representative of a variety of interests, both policy and academic. And the entire project is overseen by the University Ethics Committee of Macquarie University. So yeah, we go through their ethics application process. In broad strokes, the Carer survey is a quite long survey, admittedly. It has 77 questions, that includes 7 open questions. After the screening questions, which sort of select carers as the cohort of respondents that we want. We ask about the caring relationship, including demographics for up to 2 care recipients. We ask about the services and supports they are using, satisfaction questions, how inclusive of carers these services are, and also about the use of carer services. Then we ask about paid work, how the carers can combine work and care, and issues surrounding this complex. And then we ask about the carers' health and well-being, and finally demographics and finances. In 2022, for the first time, we will have a subsample of roughly 1,000 carers who responded to the 2020 survey and allowed us to link their responses across years, so we can follow them and follow their journey in our data, which is very exciting, because this is actually sort of the gold standard in quantitative social research, is that you have sort of really can show this development through the years of a caring role. And we're very proud that we managed to include that in our survey design. Correspondingly, there's a bit of a focus on staying comparable with 2020, so we didn't change that many questions. And a lot of our questions have a temporal focus on the past 2 years, which also coincide with the COVID-19 pandemic. 2020, we did the survey right at the start of the first nationwide lockdowns. And yeah, it is an interesting time to be doing such big research work. We added a question about general life events. We continued our focus on social connectedness and finances, which we had in 2020. We refined and shortened the paid work questions. We refined questions on health and on service use, and we added some questions around housing, the suitability of housing for the caring role, and we added the so-called self-efficacy scale. We collected the data both online and in print. The survey got mailed out in hard copy to members in New South Wales, South Australia, Tasmania, and to these 2,800 carers that allowed us to track their responses from 2020. Hard copies were distributed also through our networks, service providers. A lot of carers requested hard copies, and we brought them with us to conferences and events that we attended. The main bulk of data collection was done online, though, from the 1st of June to the 30th of July, and was supported by advertisements on social media, newsletters, our channels, whatever we had. And on the right, you see the question that defined whether you were allowed to participate in the survey. This is how we defined carer for the purpose of this survey. So someone who looks or helps to look after someone who has a disability, a mental illness, drug or alcohol dependency, a chronic condition, dementia, terminal or serious illness, or who needs care due to aging. So who responded? We got 6,826 valid responses. That's a pretty big survey. 23% in hard copy and 76% online. However, we know from the responses that a lot of the hard copies actually prompted a completion of the survey online. The majority was carers with a current caring role, 93%, and 450 did not have a current caring role, but still completed the carer survey because they see themselves as a carer. And this is a very important component for us, especially with the panel and with the linking of answers, of responses to 2020, that we can sort of also capture what might be the end of a caring journey, but might have, since the caring role might have long-term effects, we want to capture them too. So the participation of former carers is actually quite important for us. Unsurprisingly, the majority of our respondents are female. So 3 out of 4 are female, with 31 respondents saying that they're non-binary or don't identify as either male or female. The average age was 59 years, and you can see on the right the age bands. The largest age band is actually 60 to 69. We also have a variety of cultural backgrounds in our survey. 2.7% were identifying as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. Roughly a third of our respondents, not quite, were not of Australian, identified culturally not as Australian, and 11% speak a language other than English at home. Around 60% of our respondents lived in major cities, so there's a bit of focus in that, like with the general distribution of the Australian population, with 40% of our respondents coming from regional areas across Australia. A third of our respondents have a paid job, and another 7.6% are looking for work. Who are they caring for? The majority of our respondents were caring for a child with a disability mostly, followed by a partner or a parent. The most frequent conditions of the person that was cared for were disabilities, be it physical, intellectual, or ASD, followed by chronic health conditions, mental illness with a third of care recipients, or due to frailty due to old age, whereas 47% of the people that are being cared for in our survey were older than 65 years. On average, the carers who responded to our survey provided 103 hours of care per week, more than 103 hours of care per week, and 69% provided more than 40 hours of care per week. So we see how intense the caring roles are that are represented in our survey. In terms of experience with services, we saw that there's a wide gap between services that are more responsive to care needs and that ask about carers' needs and are inclusive of carers, and some service types that are not. So whereas aged care is the service type with the highest care awareness, it is still interesting to see that more than 30% of carers say they weren't asked about their needs as a carer, and simultaneously a third of people caring for someone in the aged care system said that their needs as a carer weren't met by the aged care system. NDIS and mental health services fare even worse on this metric. This was quite concerning for us. It's not news, but there's a lot of room to improve for disability services and mental health services to be care inclusive and carer aware. In terms of issues with services, we found that for the aged care system, long wait times, a lower level than required, and the complexity of the aged care system were mentioned, whereas for the NDIS, underfunding, again, long wait times, and the complexity and the difficulty to find information were the most frequently encountered issues. For mental health services, again, long wait times and difficulties to find information. What actually is also an issue that has come up in the other service systems, but is more prominently in the mental health system, is that the costs of services are too high, and that many seem not to address the cause of the mental illness, but rather the symptoms. Across all service systems, we found that 55% of the carers said that the services were reduced or interrupted due to COVID-19, and for the NDS, this shot up to 65% of disability services that were interrupted due to COVID-19 restrictions. In terms of health and well-being, one result that is always quite concerning for us is the high level of social isolation that we found among carers, with 56.3% saying that they're highly socially isolated or only have very low social support. So we use a validated scale for this metric, so to produce better and reliable data, and this is one of the most concerning results in the entire survey. However, it is very stable compared to 2020. Similarly, 50% of carers, almost 50% of carers say they have high or very high psychological distress, and the well-being level is at 57.7% on average for current carers, on average for the PWI, compared with 75% on the same metric in the general population. Another area where we where we're a little bit concerned is the high rates of experiences of financial stress. 1 in 2 of our respondents experienced some form of financial stress, and 1 in 7 experienced four or more indicators of financial stress, which puts them into the category of being in financial distress. The most commonly mentioned financial stress experience was that they would be unable to raise $2,000 in a week for something important, say a car repair or broken washing machine. And most also said they spent more money than they received in a month. So overall, we find a continuing trend with very high social isolation, as I said, very low well-being and high distress. But to turn it around, considering that 2020 was the start of COVID and 2022 was sort of seeing a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of COVID issues, it was interesting that it didn't get worse. It is concerning how high the level of social isolation is, but it seems to be stable over the last 2 years, similar with well-being and distress. Another result that is very clear from our data is that COVID severely impacted services, and carers were filling the gap with 10% point increase of those who were caring more than 40 hours a week, and with a significant uptick in the use for mental health services, both for the carer and for the care recipient. Despite the unmet service needs, interestingly, improved a little. There's still continuing high unmet need for, especially for respite services and for face-to-face services for carers. So that was my quick overview over the first results. And yeah, there will be more results released as we keep analyzing the data. It's a treasure trove, and I would like to thank all carers and everyone involved for producing such a great data set. And I would really like to thank the many thousands of carers that contributed to this data set over the past few months. Yeah, further results will be published as we go on our survey webpage with the big summary report with all the data and all the detail to be published at Carers Week next year. But if you stay in touch, we will update on new releases continuously on our socials and through our networks. Thank you so much. And now we've got space for a little bit of questions.
Thanks very much for that, Lucas. Yes, we've got a couple of questions that have come through already, but feel free to add any to the chat or to the Q&A function that arise. So first one we have here is, and you may have already partially addressed this, but if you have anything else to add, Lucas, why do you think carer health and wellbeing has remained largely unchanged even during the pandemic?
That's a good question. I think on the one hand, the well-being levels, we didn't measure social isolation in that form prior to 2020, so we don't really have comparative data, but we did measure for New South Wales the well-being with the same instrument and the levels of distress. And when we looked at the data from 2018, we already saw that these levels were present even then. It's not 100% comparable because it's on 2018 is only New South Wales and is a different sample. But my suspicion is that the impacts of the caring role were so strong even before the pandemic that you know, a lot of things have changed during COVID, and a lot of additional responsibilities have been put onto carers. But because the demands were so high already previously, our instruments don't pick up any sort of it getting worse. I think we're sort of at a base level there where resilience really kicks in, and where carers really show, okay, this is how much they are, how much can be demanded of them, and yeah, this is why we're stable at that level. Anything lower would be really, really concerning.
And one thing I think we will look at in more depth will be some of the qualitative data that's come out of questions relating to health and wellbeing, and we'll get a better kind of more rounded understanding of how that's all happened. We also had questions this year, as Lucas touched on, specifically around COVID impacts and also natural disasters. So we will release some more analysis of that and see whether, I guess, wellbeing impacts were differentiated for different groups that might have had more severe experiences in those different things that have occurred. We have had a couple more questions come through. So we had a question about the recommendations that might come. So will you be able to contribute to any recommendations that can be drawn from these results? So I can respond to that one. And that really is something that is key, as Lucas mentioned before, around the advocacy use of this data. So this survey is really one of the key reasons we conducted is to really understand the issues. We can make recommendations about improved policy and services. So what we will be doing after Carers Week is starting a systematic process of looking at what topics we want to delve into in terms of what order of priority, and we will really release a lot of the data through things like policy submissions and conference presentations on different topics that are pressing from a policy perspective. So there's lots of opportunity for recommendations. We will, as we do analysis and reporting on different topics, make recommendations about those topics as the findings emerge, but we will also be definitely applying the findings to particular policy opportunities. So, for example, there's a lot happening around work and care at the moment, productivity commission inquiries happening into care leave, opportunities to respond to those kinds of opportunities. We will bring data forward in that as well. So lots of opportunity for recommendations. We've had a comment there, or observation, which noted the high number of mental health carers that felt their needs weren't asked. And that's among those that were aware of Carers New South Wales or services enough to respond to the survey. And just a comment that must be exacerbated among people that are not aware of those supports, which is definitely something we recognise. So those that respond to this survey, many of them are connected already with Carers New South Wales or the other organisations. So we are seeing a group of people that are probably more aware of supports. So that's really important to keep in mind. We had also another question here, I think, which is, or a comment, that a lot of carers may have come online and benefited from offerings there to support themselves during COVID. And that's certainly the case. And we do have some findings built into on online supports. Did you want to comment on that, Lucas?
We haven't really looked at the impact of online supports in detail yet. But it seems to be that I think sort of my hypothesis is that during COVID, there was a bit of a higher awareness among service providers of carers because they were the ones taking over. And so, yes, I would agree that with the move online, a lot of that has been demanding for a lot of carers, but online services really kicked off and seems to have had definitely a positive impact and probably reached carers who wouldn't have had access to other services even pre-COVID. So yeah, I think there's definitely some interesting things to look at in the context of online and face-to-face services. Nevertheless, we do see still a very high demand for face-to-face services, particularly. So yeah.
Definitely. And one of the things we hope to delve into in a lot more detail is just an understanding of service usage, both carer support services and care services for people being cared for. And then an additional section that we added this year around general services like health services that carers have used for themselves. So we'll look a lot more in depth at that, at the impacts of COVID on that, at differences from previous years. I think there'll be a lot to identify through there around how both the COVID interruptions to face-to-face services, but also the innovations through telehealth and other things impacted carers. But as Lucas said, it's a bit of a mixed bag. And just one more brief question that we might address before wrapping up is from someone that's participating today that has said, according to the survey, what will be the next step to support carers? I think that's a really great question to sort of tie everything together. We referred to the question earlier about recommendations. So what will really happen, I guess, post Carers Week in particular, as I mentioned, we'll be delving into the different findings to look at what the priorities are. So we work closely with the state and territory carer organisations that supported the delivery of the survey. We'll be looking at what their local priorities are, what their local data is showing, but also what the national and New South Wales data is highlighting. And so already, as Lucas has highlighted, there's particular areas of concern: financial wellbeing, psychological distress, ongoing personal wellbeing. These are all things that are a challenge, as well as things like COVID impacts on services. So certainly in New South Wales, one of the key kind of first applications of this data is going to be our pre-budget submission to the New South Wales government, which will be made public the second week of November. So stay tuned for that. But really there's so much to say about what to do to improve services and policy for carers. So I guess it can't necessarily be distilled to one specific thing, only to say that both Carers New South Wales and the other organisations we work with will be working hard until the next survey, basically to use all of this evidence to really improve awareness and policy and support for carers. So as maybe if you can flip back to that prior slide, Lucas, please do stay tuned and stay connected with Carers New South Wales to hear about the findings that they're released. And we are also very open to working with other researchers and organisations to get these findings out there. And we've already got a number of requests from government agencies as well around looking at particular issues and particular jurisdictions, and we're working with them to raise things that they need to address. So that's what's next. We're going to have to wrap up there, but I think we've answered most of the questions that have come up. Thank you very much for your interest. Please do check out the national and New South Wales high-level findings, and we look forward to sharing more with you in the coming weeks and months. And happy National Carers Week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.